Frost Hollow had never been a welcoming place, not for people like Isaiah Thompson and his mother. The small, snow-covered town seemed to exist in a permanent state of frozen indifference. People hurried through the icy streets with their heads down, as if afraid to acknowledge anyone unfamiliar. Isaiah tugged his thin coat tighter around his body as the bitter wind whipped past him. His cheeks burned from the cold, and the snow crunched loudly under his brother Caleb's old sneakers. They were worn and scuffed, but they were warm, and more importantly, they were the last thing Isaiah had to remind him of Caleb. Caleb had been everything to Isaiah, an older brother, a guide, and a protector. But Caleb was gone now, and all Isaiah had left were these sneakers. Each time he wore them, it felt like Caleb was still walking beside him. "Don't stop moving," Isaiah muttered to himself as his breath formed clouds in the icy air. He had to finish his errand quickly and get back home. His mother, Marissa, had asked him to pick up a loaf of bread and a carton of milk from the store. It wasn't much, but it was all they could afford. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sound being the whistle of the wind and the occasional car crunching over the frozen road. As Isaiah approached the small grocery store, he hesitated. Frost Hollow's residents rarely smiled at him or even acknowledged him. At first, he thought it was just the town's way, but he quickly realized that it had more to do with him. They saw him as an outsider. Worse, they saw him as different, someone who didn't belong in their quiet, insulated world. Isaiah sighed and pushed open the door to the store, stepping into the warmth with a sense of relief. The shopkeeper, a balding man with a sour expression, barely glanced up as Isaiah entered. Isaiah moved quickly through the narrow aisles, collecting the items his mother had asked for. Bread. Milk. He paused in front of a display of candy bars, wondering if there was any way he could stretch the change in his pocket to afford a small treat. But he shook his head. There wasn't enough. As he approached the counter, he fumbled with the coins in his hand, carefully counting them to make sure he had enough. He didn't want any mistakes. "That's it," the shopkeeper grunted, ringing up the items. Isaiah nodded and handed over the coins, murmuring a quiet, "Yes, sir." He took the small paper bag with his groceries and turned to leave, but as he reached the door, a voice stopped him in his tracks. "Hey you, hold it right there." Isaiah froze. His heart sank as he recognized the voice. It was Officer Grant. Slowly, he turned to see the tall, broad-shouldered officer standing by the entrance. Grant's eyes bore into him, cold and calculating. "What's in the bag?" the officer demanded, his tone sharp and accusatory. Isaiah held up the paper bag, his hands trembling. "Just groceries, sir. Bread and milk." Grant took a step closer, his boots thudding against the tiled floor. He snatched the bag from Isaiah's hands and peered inside, as if expecting to find something incriminating. Isaiah's stomach churned with unease. He wanted to protest, to say that he hadn't done anything wrong, but the words caught in his throat. "Where'd you get the money for this?" Grant asked, narrowing his eyes. "My mom gave it to me," Isaiah replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Grant's gaze dropped to Isaiah's feet, and his expression hardened. "Those sneakers, where'd you get them?" Isaiah blinked, confused. They were my brother's." "They look too nice for a kid like you," Grant sneered. "Take them off." Isaiah's breath caught in his chest. He stared at the officer in disbelief. "But they're mine," he stammered. "Did I stutter?" Grant snapped. "I said take them off." Isaiah's hands shook as he bent down to untie the laces. His fingers were numb from the cold, and it took longer than he would have liked. The other customers in the store watched silently, their faces a mix of discomfort and indifference. Not one of them spoke up. As Isaiah slipped off the sneakers, the icy floor bit into his thin socks. He held the shoes out to Grant, his heart breaking as he felt the last tangible connection to Caleb being ripped away. Grant snatched the sneakers from him, a cruel smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Maybe this'll teach you not to wander where you don't belong," he said before turning and walking out of the store. Isaiah stood there, barefoot and humiliated, the cold seeping into his skin. The shopkeeper coughed awkwardly, avoiding Isaiah's gaze as he muttered, "You'd better leave." Isaiah picked up his bag of groceries and shuffled out of the store. The icy sidewalk felt like knives against his feet, but he kept moving, refusing to let himself cry. As he walked home, he replayed the scene in his mind, over and over. The officer's mocking words, the way the other customers had just stood there, and the crushing loss of Caleb's sneakers. By the time he reached the small house he shared with his mother, Isaiah's toes were nearly numb, and his spirit felt just as frozen. But as he stepped inside and saw his mother's worried face, he forced himself to smile. He wouldn't tell her what happened. She had enough to worry about. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Isaiah clenched his fists and whispered a vow to himself. This isn't right. One day, they'll know the truth. One day, I'll stand up for myself and for Caleb. Isaiah woke the next morning to the sound of his mother's voice, soft and warm despite the early hour. Isaiah, breakfast is ready. It's just eggs and toast, but it'll warm you up. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes and glanced at the pair of shoes sitting by his bed. They weren't Caleb's sneakers. Those were gone. These were an old pair of his mother's, too large and awkward, but it was all she had to offer. Isaiah sighed as he slid his feet into them, feeling the empty space around his toes. The loss of Caleb's sneakers wasn't just about the shoes themselves. It was the connection to his brother, the memories they held. But he couldn't dwell on it. When he came into the kitchen, Marissa was bustling around the stove, flipping eggs in a worn-out frying pan. She turned to him, her tired eyes softening when she saw him. "How'd it go yesterday?" she asked. "Did you get everything we needed?" Isaiah hesitated. "Yeah, I got it all," he said, forcing a smile. Marissa didn't press further. She had a knack for sensing when Isaiah was holding something back, but she also knew when to let it be. She handed him a plate of eggs and toast, and they ate in companionable silence. After breakfast, Isaiah bundled up and headed out the door. It was a school day, and while he didn't mind learning, he dreaded facing the other kids. Most of them didn't bother him, but a few made it clear he wasn't welcome. The walk to school was as cold as ever, the wind biting at his face and hands. The ill-fitting shoes made it harder to keep up his pace, but he pressed on, his resolve stiffening with every step. As he reached the school gates, he heard someone call his name. "Isaiah." He turned to see Liam, a boy from his class, jogging toward him. Liam was a wiry kid with messy brown hair and an easy grin. "Hey, man," Liam said, falling into step beside him. "You okay? You look different." Isaiah shrugged. "I'm fine. Just tired." Liam tilted his head, studying him. "You're wearing different shoes. What happened to the other ones? The cool ones?" Isaiah's stomach tightened. He didn't want to explain what had happened, didn't want to relive the humiliation. But Liam was the closest thing he had to a friend here. "They got taken," Isaiah said quietly. Liam frowned. "Taken? By who?" Isaiah hesitated, then decided there was no harm in telling him. "Officer Grant. Yesterday, at the store. He said they didn't belong to me and made me take them off." Liam's jaw dropped. "Are you serious? That guy's such a jerk. He's always picking on people." Isaiah glanced around nervously. "Keep it down, okay? I don't want to make it worse." Liam's expression hardened. "Worse? It's already bad enough. He can't just get away with that." Before Isaiah could respond, the school bell rang, cutting their conversation short. The day dragged on, but Isaiah couldn't shake Liam's words. He had accepted what happened as just another piece of bad luck, something to endure like the cold or the stares from strangers. But Liam's anger made him wonder if it had to be that way. After school, Liam caught up with him again. "Listen," Liam said, his voice low but insistent. "I know someone who might be able to help." Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "Help with what?" "With Officer Grant. With what he did to you." Isaiah shook his head. "There's no point. Nobody's going to believe me. It's my word against his." Liam grinned. "That's where you're wrong. My cousin Sophia is a journalism student. She knows all about calling out people like him. If you tell her what happened, she'll know what to do." Isaiah hesitated. The idea of sharing his story with a stranger made him uneasy, but there was something about Liam's confidence that gave him pause. "Okay," Isaiah said finally. "I'll talk to her, but no promises." That evening, Isaiah found himself sitting in Liam's kitchen, sipping a mug of hot cocoa while Liam's cousin, Sofia Reyes, sat across from him. She was in her early 20s, with dark curly hair and a sharp, determined look in her eyes. "So, Isaiah," Sofia began, her voice calm but serious, "Liam told me what happened. Can you tell me the whole story?" Isaiah nodded, his hands gripping the warm mug. He recounted the events at the store, from the moment Officer Grant stopped him to the humiliation of walking home barefoot. As he spoke, Sofia listened intently, her expression growing darker with each detail. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed. "That's horrible. But unfortunately, it's not surprising. People like him think they can do whatever they want because no one holds them accountable." Isaiah shrugged. "What can I do? He's a cop. Nobody's going to believe me over him." Sofia's eyes narrowed. "Maybe not on your own, but if we get your story out there, if people see what happened, they'll believe you. And they'll demand answers." "How?" Isaiah asked, skeptical. Sofia pulled out her phone. "We record your story. You tell people exactly what happened, and I'll help you upload it. Trust me, Isaiah. Once people see this, they won't be able to ignore it." Isaiah's heart raced at the thought. He wasn't sure he wanted that kind of attention, but a small voice in the back of his mind whispered that this might be his chance. His chance to stand up for himself and for Caleb. He glanced at Liam, who nodded encouragingly, and then back at Sofia. "Okay," Isaiah said. "Let's do it." Isaiah sat nervously in Liam's living room, a camera phone propped up on a stack of books in front of him. Sofia adjusted the angle, her face focused as she lined up the shot. Liam stood beside her, offering words of encouragement. "Just speak from the heart," Sofia said, her tone gentle but firm. "Tell the truth about what happened. People need to hear it, Isaiah." Isaiah nodded, but his hands were clammy and his stomach churned. He had never spoken in front of a camera before, and the idea of people watching his story, judging it, terrified him. "What if they don't believe me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sofia crouched beside him, meeting his eyes. "Some people won't, but the truth has a way of cutting through the noise. You're not just speaking for yourself. You're speaking for anyone who's been treated unfairly and felt powerless to do anything about it. This is bigger than you, Isaiah." Isaiah took a deep breath, her words settling over him like a blanket of resolve. He thought of Caleb, of the way his brother had always told him to stand tall, no matter how hard life got. "Okay," Isaiah said, his voice steadier now. "I'm ready." Sofia pressed record, and the camera's light blinked on. Isaiah started hesitantly, his voice quiet and unsure. But as he recounted what had happened, Officer Grant's harsh words, the humiliation of being forced to take off his brother's sneakers, and the freezing walk home, his voice grew stronger. "This isn't right," Isaiah said, his gaze locked on the camera. "Nobody should be treated like this. I didn't do anything wrong, but he treated me like I didn't belong, like I wasn't even human. I know I'm not the only one he's done this to. People need to know the truth." Sofia stopped the recording, giving Isaiah an encouraging smile. "You did great." Isaiah wasn't sure. His nerves still buzzed, and he felt exposed, as though he'd just bared his soul to the world. But Liam clapped him on the back, grinning. "That was awesome," Liam said. "People are gonna see this, and they're gonna be mad. Trust me." Sofia uploaded the video later that evening, adding a brief caption. "A young boy's heartbreaking story of injustice in Frost Hollow. #StandWithIsaiah." She shared it across social media platforms, tagging local activists and journalists she knew. "Now we wait," she said, setting her phone down. Isaiah didn't sleep much that night. His mind raced with possibilities, both good and bad. What if the video went nowhere? What if people laughed at him? Worse, what if Officer Grant found out? By the next morning, Isaiah's life began to change. When he woke up, Liam texted him, "You're going viral." Isaiah stared at the message, his heart pounding. He logged onto the social media account Sofia had helped him create and saw that his video had already been shared hundreds of times. Comments flooded in, some supportive, others skeptical. "This is heartbreaking. That cop needs to be fired. This doesn't sound real. There's no proof. Stay strong, Isaiah. We're with you." Isaiah felt a mix of emotions as he scrolled through the responses. For every kind word, there was a cutting remark, someone doubting his story or accusing him of seeking attention. He showed the comments to Sophia and Liam when they met later that day. "Don't let the negative ones get to you," Sophia said firmly. "For every troll, there are 10 people who are on your side. Look at how many people are sharing it. That's what matters." Liam nodded. "Yeah, dude. This is blowing up. People are paying attention, and that's huge." By the end of the week, Isaiah's story had been picked up by a local news outlet. A reporter reached out, asking for an interview. Sophia handled the communication, ensuring that Isaiah's voice was front and center. The interview aired during the evening news, showing Isaiah sitting beside his mother in their modest living room. Marissa's face was tense as she listened to her son recount the incident. She hadn't known the full extent of what had happened until now, and her hands trembled as she clasped them tightly in her lap. "I just want justice," Isaiah said, his voice steady but emotional. "I want people to see what's happening here and to know it's not okay." The reporter highlighted other allegations against Officer Grant, mentioning past complaints that had been quietly dismissed by the department. As the story gained traction, reactions in Frost Hollow were mixed. Some residents voiced their support, sharing the video and calling for an investigation. Others, however, were quick to defend the officer, accusing Isaiah of lying. "You're just stirring up trouble," one neighbor muttered to Marissa at the grocery store. "That boy should have kept his mouth shut." Marissa clenched her fists, but she held her tongue. She knew the risks of speaking out, but she also knew that Isaiah needed her support now more than ever. Then came the backlash. Officer Grant, emboldened by his defenders, made subtle but threatening remarks. He parked his cruiser outside Isaiah's house for hours at a time, the engine idling as if to remind them of his presence. Liam noticed the tension, his usual grin replaced with a determined frown. "We can't let him scare us. That's what he wants." Sophia agreed. "We need more voices. If we can get other people who've been wronged by him to speak up, it'll be harder for them to ignore us." Isaiah wasn't sure if he could handle more pressure. The stress was already mounting, and the fear of retaliation weighed heavily on him. But as he thought about Caleb and the sneakers he'd lost, he realized he couldn't back down now. "This isn't just about me," he said one evening as he and Liam sat on the front steps of Liam's house. "If I let this go, he'll just keep doing it to other people. I have to do something." Liam nodded, his eyes shining with determination. "Then let's find a way to make sure your voice isn't the only one they hear." The chapter ends with Isaiah making a firm decision to gather the stories of others and bring them into the light, no matter the risk. The video had been viewed thousands of times, shared across social media, and picked up by local news outlets. But with the attention came a torrent of backlash, both online and in Frost Hollow itself. Isaiah felt it everywhere he went. At school, kids whispered as he passed, their glances a mix of curiosity and judgment. In town, strangers eyed him warily, some muttering under their breath, others crossing the street to avoid him. "Ignore them," Liam said as they walked to the local library after school. "They're just scared because you're shaking things up." Isaiah nodded, but the weight of the stairs pressed heavily on his shoulders. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, and it felt like the whole town had turned into a jury, silently deciding whether they believed him or not. At the library, Sophia was waiting for them at a back table, her laptop open and a notepad beside her. She had spent the past few days collecting information about Officer Grant, combing through public records, and speaking with activists she knew. "Good you're here," she said as they approached. "I've got something to show you." Sophia turned her laptop toward them, revealing an online forum where several people from Frost Hollow had shared their own encounters with Officer Grant. One post read, "Grant pulled me over last year for a broken taillight. I told him I couldn't afford to fix it right away, and he laughed in my face. Gave me a ticket anyway. Guy's a bully." Another, "My nephew got stopped walking home from school. Grant said he looked suspicious. He's only 13. Isaiah's chest tightened as he read the posts. He wasn't alone. "People are starting to speak up," Sophia said. "They're scared, but your video gave them the courage to share their stories." Isaiah felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly doused by a sense of unease. What if it's not enough? he asked. What if people still don't believe us? Sophia leaned forward, her eyes sharp. That's why we need to keep building the case. If we can get people to come forward publicly, on record, it'll be harder for the department to ignore. Over the next few days, Isaiah, Liam, and Sophia worked tirelessly to gather stories from others in the community. They reached out to people who had commented on the video or the forum, asking if they'd be willing to share their experiences. Some were eager to help, their anger at Officer Grant outweighing their fear. Grant's been a problem for years, said Mrs. Jenkins, a middle-aged woman who had lived in Frost Hollow her entire life. But nobody ever does anything about it. If you're finally taking a stand, I'll back you up. Others were hesitant, their voices trembling as they recounted their encounters. I don't want any trouble, said Mr. Alvarez, a mechanic who claimed Grant had harassed him multiple times. But if you think it'll make a difference, I'll talk. Not everyone was willing to help. Some refused outright, worried about the consequences of going against a police officer. Others accused Isaiah of stirring up unnecessary trouble, their loyalty to the town's authorities blinding them to the injustice. The backlash from the police department was swift and severe. A statement was released, dismissing Isaiah's claims as unsubstantiated and defending Officer Grant as an upstanding member of the force. The department implied that Isaiah's video was misleading, a ploy to gain attention. Sophia read the statement aloud to Isaiah and Liam as they sat in her living room. Her voice was tight with frustration. They're doubling down, she said. They're trying to discredit you. Isaiah clenched his fists, anger bubbling inside him. They're lying. They know what he did. Of course they do, Sophia said. But they're counting on people believing them over you. That's why we need more evidence, more witnesses. The louder our voices, the harder it'll be for them to ignore us. One night, as Isaiah was walking home from Liam's house, he noticed a familiar figure standing at the corner of his street. His heart sank as he recognized the dark uniform and broad shoulders of Officer Grant. Grant leaned casually against his patrol car, his arms crossed. When Isaiah approached, he straightened up, his expression cold and unreadable. Out late, aren't you? Grant said, his tone mocking. Isaiah stopped a few feet away, his pulse pounding in his ears. I'm just going home. Grant smirked. You know, you're causing a lot of trouble with that little video of yours. Stirring up things that don't need stirring. Isaiah said nothing, his hands clenched at his sides. Grant took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You think people are gonna believe you over me? I've been here a long time, kid. I know how to make things disappear. Fear coiled in Isaiah's stomach, but he forced himself to stand his ground. I'm not lying, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. And I'm not going to stop. Grant's smirk faded, replaced by a cold glare. He stepped back, shaking his head. We'll see about that. Isaiah watched as Grant climbed into his patrol car and drove away, his taillights disappearing into the night. Isaiah told Liam and Sophia about the encounter the next day. He's trying to scare me, Isaiah said, his hands shaking as he recounted the officer's words. Sophia's jaw tightened. That just proves we're getting to him. If he wasn't worried, he wouldn't be trying to intimidate you. But what if he does something worse? Isaiah asked. What if he really does try to make me disappear? Liam put a hand on Isaiah's shoulder. He's not gonna win, Isaiah. You've got us, and we're not gonna let him hurt you. Sophia nodded. We'll keep pushing. He wants you to give up because he knows you're telling the truth. Don't let him win. Isaiah took a deep breath, the fear still gnawing at the edges of his resolve. But he thought of Caleb, of the sneakers that had been taken from him, and of the people in Frost Hollow who were counting on him to stand up for what was right. I won't, Isaiah said firmly. I'm not giving up. The chapter ends with Isaiah resolving to keep fighting, even as the stakes grow higher and the dangers more real. The meeting took place in a dimly lit room at the Frost Hollow Community Center. Isaiah sat in a folding chair, his hands gripping the edge of the seat. Around him, a small but growing group of people had gathered, faces he recognized from the streets of Frost Hollow, others he had only heard about through whispers. Sophia stood at the front of the room, her laptop open on a table. She tapped the screen to display a slideshow, its title stark and bold, standing together, stories of injustice. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice clear and steady. I know it's not easy to speak out, especially in a town like this, but your courage in being here tonight is the first step toward making real change. Isaiah glanced around the room. There was Mrs. Jenkins, the lifelong resident who had spoken to him about her run-ins with Officer Grant. Beside her was Mr. Alvarez, the mechanic who had reluctantly agreed to share his story. Several others sat scattered among the chairs, their expressions a mix of determination and anxiety. Isaiah felt a lump rise in his throat. These people had come here because of him, because of his story. For the first time, he didn't feel alone in his fight. Sophia began the meeting by sharing an overview of what they had learned so far. We've identified at least a dozen incidents involving Officer Grant, she said, clicking through slides that detailed each case. Unlawful searches, excessive force, intimidation. His behavior isn't just a one-time occurrence. It's a pattern. The room buzzed with murmurs as people absorbed the information. Why hasn't anyone done anything about this before? One man asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Mrs. Jenkins answered, her tone sharp. Because they cover for him. The department protects its own, no matter how much harm they cause. It's been like that for years. Sophia nodded. That's why we're here. Alone, it's easy to dismiss one voice. But together, we're harder to ignore. The first person to speak was Mr. Alvarez. His voice was hesitant at first, but as he recounted his encounters with Officer Grant, it grew stronger. He stopped me 3 times in 1 month, Alvarez said, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Always for something small, my license plate light, a supposed rolling stop. But it was never about that. He wanted to intimidate me, to make me feel like I didn't belong here. Mrs. Jenkins spoke next, her voice filled with decades of frustration. He pulled my grandson over last year, accused him of stealing his own bike. The boy was terrified. Grant didn't even apologize when we showed him the receipt. One by one, the others in the room shared their stories. Some were brief, a single encounter that had left them shaken. Others were more detailed, describing years of harassment and fear. Isaiah listened intently, his heart heavy but also filled with a strange sense of purpose. These people weren't just numbers or statistics, they were human beings, each with their own struggles and pain. And their stories mirrored his own. By the end of the meeting, the group had agreed on their next steps. We're going to compile everything into a formal report, Sophia said, typing notes into her laptop. Every story, every detail. We'll submit it to the town council, the oversight board, and the media. If the department won't hold him accountable, we'll make sure the public does. But what if they ignore us? Someone asked, fear creeping into their voice. They might try, Sophia admitted. But the more people we have on record, the harder it'll be for them to sweep this under the rug. This isn't just about one officer anymore. It's about the system that lets people like him get away with this. Isaiah felt a spark of determination. For the first time, he could see a path forward, a way to turn his pain into action. As the meeting wrapped up, Isaiah found himself standing with Liam and Sophia outside the community center. The cold night air stung his face, but he barely noticed. You did great in there, Liam said, nudging Isaiah with his elbow. People are really starting to rally behind you. Isaiah gave a small smile. It's not just about me anymore. It's about all of us. Sophia nodded, her expression thoughtful. We're building something powerful here, Isaiah, but we have to be ready. The more noise we make, the harder they're going to push back. Isaiah nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy. But as he looked around at the faces of the people who had shared their stories, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. We'll be ready, he said firmly. That night, Isaiah sat at his desk, a notebook open in front of him. He wrote down everything he could remember about his encounter with Officer Grant. The words, the looks, the feeling of the cold pavement under his feet. He thought of Caleb, of the way his brother had always encouraged him to stand up for what was right. For the first time since the incident, Isaiah felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just a fight for justice. It was a fight for his brother's memory, for his mother's sacrifices, and for everyone who had been made to feel small and powerless. Isaiah closed the notebook and stared out the window. The night was dark, but he could see the faintest glimmer of light on the horizon. The storm wasn't over, but he wasn't facing it alone anymore. The days after the meeting felt like the calm before a storm. Isaiah, Sophia, and Liam worked tirelessly, compiling every story, every piece of evidence, and every painful detail into a single report. It was slow, grueling work. Isaiah spent hours revisiting his own encounter with Officer Grant, recounting the humiliation he had felt in agonizing detail. But as the report grew, so did the opposition. One chilly afternoon, Isaiah sat at the kitchen table with Sophia. She was hunched over her laptop, typing furiously, while Isaiah sifted through notes from their interviews. Marissa moved quietly in the background, wiping down the counters and pretending not to listen. "How's it looking?" Isaiah asked, leaning over to glance at Sophia's screen. Sophia exhaled deeply, brushing a stray curl from her face. "It's good, but it needs to be airtight. The department's already doubling down on their defense." They released another statement this morning. She opened the police department's social media page, revealing the post. "The allegations against Officer Grant remain unsubstantiated. We urge the community not to jump to conclusions and to trust the integrity of our officers." Isaiah's stomach churned. "They're calling me a liar." "They're scared," Sophia said, her voice firm. "If they thought they could ignore you, they wouldn't bother responding at all. But they know this is gaining traction." Marissa stepped forward, her hands wringing the dish rag nervously. "Isaiah, are you sure about all this? I don't want you to get hurt. You know how this town is." Isaiah looked up at her, seeing the worry etched into her face. "I have to, Mom. For Caleb. For us. For everyone they've treated like this." Marissa didn't reply, but the small nod she gave him was enough. Later that evening, the backlash turned personal. Isaiah and Liam were walking home after delivering a printed copy of the report to Daniel Cole, Sophia's cousin and a law student who had offered to review it. The snow crunched under their feet as they discussed the next steps. "Daniel says we have enough for a formal complaint," Liam said, his breath fogging in the cold air. "He thinks the town council might actually take it seriously if we get enough signatures." Isaiah nodded. "That's good. Maybe this will finally—" A loud screech cut him off. Both boys turned to see a black SUV pulling up alongside them. The window rolled down, and a man in his late 40s leaned out. His face was red with anger, and his words came fast and sharp. "You kids think you can ruin a good man's career?" the man spat. "You have no idea what you're messing with. Leave it alone." Isaiah's heart raced as the SUV sped off, its tires kicking up slush. He glanced at Liam, who looked just as shaken. "Who was that?" Isaiah asked, his voice trembling. "No idea," Liam said, his usual confidence replaced with unease. "But we need to be careful." The next day, Sophia called an emergency meeting at her apartment. Isaiah, Liam, and Daniel sat around her dining table as she paced the room, her phone buzzing with notifications. "This is getting serious," Sophia said. "The video's been shared over 20,000 times now, but so have the threats." She showed them her phone, where hateful comments flooded her posts. "Stop spreading lies. This is just some kid looking for attention. You're ruining a good cop's reputation." "We knew this would happen," Daniel said calmly, adjusting his glasses. "The closer we get to exposing the truth, the harder they'll push back. We just need to stay focused." Isaiah looked around the room, feeling both the weight of their support and the burden of what they were trying to accomplish. "What if they're right?" he asked quietly. "What if it's not enough? What if nobody listens?" Sophia stopped pacing and placed a hand on his shoulder. "They're already listening, Isaiah. You've started something bigger than you realize, and we're not going to let them silence you." The turning point came at a town hall meeting later that week. Sophia and Daniel had coordinated with local activists to present their findings to the town council. The small meeting room was packed, tension thick in the air as residents, reporters, and even a few police officers filled the seats. Isaiah sat near the front, his hands trembling as he clutched a copy of the report. Liam sat beside him, offering quiet reassurance. When it was Sophia's turn to speak, she approached the podium with a stack of papers. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady despite the murmurs from the crowd. I'm here on behalf of Isaiah Thompson and the many others in this community who have experienced harassment and abuse at the hands of Officer Grant. She laid the report on the table before the council members. This document contains testimony from over a dozen residents detailing misconduct, intimidation, and systemic failures within our police department. We demand an independent investigation into these allegations. The room erupted into a mix of applause and angry muttering. One of the council members, an older man with a stern expression, raised a hand to silence the crowd. "Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Reyes," he said, his tone polite but dismissive. "We'll review this report and respond in due course." As Sophia returned to her seat, Isaiah felt a surge of frustration. The council's indifference was palpable, their words hollow. "They're just going to bury it," he muttered. "Not if we keep the pressure on," Sophia said, her eyes blazing with determination. "This is just the beginning." That night, Isaiah received a message from Daniel. "The department's scrambling. A whistleblower inside the force just contacted me. They're ready to talk." Isaiah stared at the screen, his pulse quickening. The tide was turning, but the fight was far from over. The news of a whistleblower spread quickly among Isaiah's growing circle of allies. The contact, a junior officer named Eric Connolly, had been working with the Frost Hollow Police Department for 3 years. Connolly had seen enough to realize that the culture of silence and protection within the department wasn't just unethical, it was dangerous. "I couldn't stay quiet anymore," Connolly told Daniel during their first meeting at a nearby diner. "What Grant's been doing, it's wrong. And the department knows it." Connolly provided damning information. Internal memos about citizen complaints that had been buried, evidence of other officers turning a blind eye, and specific instances where Grant's misconduct had been intentionally ignored. When Isaiah heard the details, his stomach churned. "So they've been protecting him this whole time?" he asked, his voice trembling. Connolly nodded, shame flickering across his face. "They don't care about justice, they care about keeping things quiet. But if we expose this, they won't be able to hide anymore." The group sprang into action. Sophia compiled Connolly's testimony with the other evidence, creating a comprehensive file to present at the next town hall meeting. Meanwhile, Daniel reached out to regional media outlets, ensuring that their story would reach a wider audience. The days leading up to the meeting were tense. Isaiah found himself alternating between bursts of hope and crushing doubt. What if this wasn't enough? What if no one listened? Liam tried to keep his spirits up. "This is it, man," he said as they walked to school one morning. "We've got everything we need to take him down. Just hold on a little longer." Isaiah nodded, but the weight of the fight was taking its toll. He hadn't been able to sleep for more than a few hours at a time, his mind racing with fears and possibilities. The day of the town hall finally arrived. The room was packed with people, residents, reporters, activists, and police officers. The tension was palpable, the air heavy with anticipation. Isaiah sat near the front with Liam and Marissa by his side. His mother's hand rested gently on his, a quiet show of support. Sophia and Daniel took the lead, presenting the evidence with a calm, professional demeanor. They laid out Connolly's testimony alongside the documented complaints, painting a clear picture of systemic corruption and Grant's unchecked abuses. The crowd listened intently, their reactions ranging from shock to anger as the details were revealed. "Officer Grant's behavior is not an isolated incident," Sophia said, her voice ringing out across the room. "It is a symptom of a larger problem, a system that prioritizes protecting its own over serving the people it's supposed to protect." When she finished, a council member addressed the chief of police, who sat stone-faced in the back of the room. "Chief Hendricks, do you have a response to these allegations?" Hendricks rose slowly, his face grim. "The department takes these claims seriously," he said, though his tone betrayed no emotion. "We will conduct an internal review." The words were met with a chorus of groans and murmurs. People had heard this promise before, and they knew it often led nowhere. Isaiah felt his heart sinking as the meeting dragged on. It wasn't until the public comment section began that the tide began to shift. One by one, residents stood up to share their stories. Mrs. Jenkins recounted the harassment her grandson had endured. Mr. Alvarez described the fear he felt every time he saw Grant's patrol car. Others followed, their voices growing louder and more impassioned with each testimony. Then Isaiah stood. For a moment, the room was silent as he approached the microphone. He could feel the weight of every eye on him, the expectation, the skepticism. "My name is Isaiah Thompson," he began, his voice steady despite the nervous tremor in his hands. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't want to be here tonight, but I didn't have a choice. Officer Grant took something from me. Not just my sneakers, but my dignity, my sense of safety. And I know I'm not the only one he's hurt. That's why I'm here. Because it's time for someone to say enough is enough." His words hung in the air for a moment before the room erupted in applause. The meeting ended with the town council announcing plans for an independent investigation into the Frost Hollow Police Department. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental to Isaiah and his allies. Over the next few weeks, the pressure on the department grew. Regional news outlets picked up the story, and public outcry intensified. Officers who had once turned a blind eye began stepping forward, adding their voices to the growing call for accountability. The final blow came when the investigation revealed evidence of systemic corruption within the department. Officer Grant was suspended pending further review, and several high-ranking officials, including Chief Hendricks, resigned under mounting pressure. When Isaiah heard the news, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. For the first time since that day at the grocery store, he felt like he could breathe again. In the days that followed, Isaiah became something of a local hero. People stopped him on the street to thank him, to tell him how his courage had inspired them. But Isaiah didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a boy who had been pushed too far and had simply refused to stay silent. One evening, as he walked home with Liam, he turned to his friend. "We did it," he said quietly. Liam grinned. "You did it. I just tagged along for the ride." Isaiah smiled, but his thoughts drifted to Caleb. He wished his brother could have seen what they had accomplished. He hoped Caleb would have been proud. The chapter ends with Isaiah standing outside his house, staring up at the clear night sky. The fight wasn't over. There was still work to be done, injustices to be righted. But for the first time, he felt like he was walking a path forward, not alone, but with a community behind him. Isaiah woke to the sound of birds chirping outside his window, rare melody in Frost Hollow's cold, muted mornings. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt light, relieved, even. The town had changed, albeit slowly. Officer Grant's suspension had been extended indefinitely as new evidence continued to surface, implicating him in a string of misconduct cases. Several high-ranking officers had stepped down, and an independent oversight committee had been formed to ensure transparency within the police department. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was a start. Isaiah walked to school that morning with Liam, the snow beneath their feet crunching rhythmically. The air was crisp, and the streets felt different, less hostile, somehow. "You see the news last night?" Liam asked, his breath forming small clouds. "Not really," Isaiah said. "What happened?" "They're calling it the Frost Hollow Reckoning. Some reporter on TV said what we did here could inspire other towns to stand up against corruption. Can you believe that? We're making headlines, man." Isaiah smiled, though the idea of being in the spotlight still made him uneasy. "I'm just glad people are paying attention. It's not just about Grant. It's about making sure this doesn't happen again." Liam grinned. "You sound like Sophia. You gonna start giving speeches now?" "Maybe," Isaiah said, a flicker of humor in his voice. "If you write them for me." At school, the changes were subtle but significant. Some of the kids who had avoided Isaiah before now greeted him in the hallways. Teachers gave him encouraging nods, though he could tell some still didn't quite know how to approach him. During lunch, a group of students gathered around him and Liam, asking questions about what had happened. "Was it scary?" one girl asked, her eyes wide. "Yeah," Isaiah admitted, "but it was worth it." That evening, Isaiah returned home to find his mother sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of envelopes. Her face lit up when she saw him. "These came for you," Marissa said, sliding the pile toward him. Isaiah blinked in surprise. "For me? People have been sending letters," she said, "to thank you for what you've done." Isaiah picked up the first envelope and opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Isaiah, I saw your story on the news. What you did took so much courage, and it's inspired me to stand up for what's right in my own life. Thank you for being brave." Isaiah felt his chest tighten as he read the words. He opened another letter, and then another, each one filled with gratitude, encouragement, and admiration. Marissa watched him with quiet pride. "You've made a difference, Isaiah, not just here, but everywhere." In the days that followed, Isaiah began working with Sophia, Liam, and others to ensure the changes they'd fought for were implemented. They attended community meetings, spoke with local activists, and even helped organize a town forum to discuss issues of inequality and accountability. During one of these meetings, Daniel pulled Isaiah aside. "You've got a gift," Daniel said, his voice low but sincere. "You can connect with people, inspire them. If you wanted to, you could make this your calling." Isaiah thought about it. He didn't feel like a leader, but he couldn't deny the sense of purpose he felt when he spoke up for what was right. "I'll think about it," he said, and Daniel smiled. One crisp morning, Isaiah found himself standing in the same spot outside the grocery store where it had all begun. The snow was fresh, the air cold but invigorating. He wore a new pair of sneakers, a gift from Liam's family, their soles leaving clean imprints in the snow. For a moment, he closed his eyes and thought of Caleb. He imagined his brother standing beside him, grinning that easy grin he always wore. "I did it, Caleb," Isaiah whispered. "I didn't back down." A warmth spread through him, chasing away the chill of the morning. The story ends with Isaiah walking through Frost Hollow, his head held high. The fight wasn't over. There were still challenges to face, injustices to confront, but he was ready. For the first time in his life, Isaiah felt like he belonged. Not because the town had changed, but because he had. He was no longer the scared boy who had kept his head down and avoided eye contact. He was Isaiah Thompson, a fighter, a voice for the voiceless, and a reminder that even in the coldest winters, justice could bloom.